Hey there, heavy listeners. This is Erin, and right now I have the pleasure of speaking with Richard West of Threshold. Thanks for joining me today, Richard. How are things on your side of the world right now? Are you at home in the UK or are you currently on the road?
Yeah, hi Aaron. I'm currently at home. It's morning for us, and it's really, really wet, which you probably wouldn't expect anything different from the UK, but it's the wettest I've ever seen it. My garden has turned into a swimming pool, so I'm glad to be indoors at the moment. Nice to be talking to you.
Yeah, actually, I can relate because we are having insane amounts of rain over here at the moment too. It's abnormal, completely abnormal. But we've had floods where I live, and yeah, it's nuts.
Sorry to hear that. We always imagine coming down to you is just where it's always beautiful weather all the time, so it's a surprise to hear.
It's a lie.
Which is weird because we were planning to come down. We were supposed to be coming to see you just before COVID hit. Our very next trip was going to be an Australian tour, which would have been amazing. So we could have discovered the lie then. But sadly, we didn't get to come. So I'm really hoping that happens again next year.
I actually had that on my list of questions to ask you because I believe that was going to be your first trip over here too, right?
Yeah, in 30 years, we finally got invited. We were so excited, really. It would have been an amazing thing for us. And we just don't know now. The club's still open and the promoter's still in business. So we're going to have to go through all that again and see if it's viable. But I really hope we can. That would be an amazing tour.
Yeah, see what really happened is that we heard Threshold were coming over here, so we threw a sneaky little pandemic out there and foiled your plans.
I knew that was it
Yeah.
because you had no cases, but you closed the country anyway. And I thought, oh, they don't want us. I can understand that. We'll find a way in. We'll hide in each other's suitcases. We'll get there somehow.
No, I do truly hope that you actually managed to get out here this time. So, yes, that was going to be one of my questions. You got an Australian reschedule on the cards, but I'm going to guess there's a whole lot of reorganizing, and these things aren't easy to get up and running in the first place, let alone have to rejig things around a pandemic and lockdowns and prices going through the roof and things like that too. I know that a lot of international bands have just not bothered coming back over here because it's costing them an arm and a leg as well. So
Yeah, a lot's changed, hasn't it, in 3 years? It's quite surprising. But it took us 30 years to arrange our first trip to you. So I'm kind of hoping it'll take a bit less time for the second one.
yeah, fingers crossed. Well, times changing is sort of a bit of a theme on this new record of yours, right? Like, so the new album is Dividing Lines, and that's being released in a couple of weeks. Now, I've reviewed a whole bunch of albums for bands this year, and it does definitely feel like artists are sort of ready to start processing the events of the past few years, through their music. I want to delve into Dividing Lines with you because I got the distinct impression that like the tumultuous ride we've all been on has very much influenced this record. Would I be right?
It's hard not to be influenced by what goes on around you. But it's a weird one because we didn't want to do a political record. We didn't want to do a moany record about what's going on. But you can't help being influenced. And I think what Threshold have always tried to do is kind of take what's going on, take a bit of philosophy, take a bit of worldview stuff, and just throw it all together and see what comes out. And so you're almost making a fictional world when you make an album, and it's not like you're trying to make a political commentary. But I think we did the same on Subsurface way back in 2004. It sounded political on the face of it, but it was more like writing 1984 by George Orwell. It's kind of that approach, influenced by, but not a commentary on.
That's almost Nostradamus like. We almost felt like we were living in 1984 through the pandemic.
Well, that's the thing. We felt like that back in 2004 when we wrote Subsurface, and we feel it again now. I guess you see little steps towards that world that he painted, I suppose. And in some ways, we've already gone past that. In some ways, we're still approaching it.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, scary book to read just in terms of how much he foresaw was going to happen back then and how much you're seeing it happen now. Interesting book. I think if anyone's listening who hasn't read it, I would highly recommend it.
And there is a film too if you suck too much to be able to read books.
That's true. That was made ages ago, wasn't it? Really, really badly made, if I remember it rightly.
Yeah, it had John Hurt in it.
That's the one. Yeah, I tried watching it. Yeah, it was a bit painful. I'd say read the book. The book's beautifully written. That would be my recommendation.
So I guess like music is a catharsis as well. So like you said, it's hard not to kind of paint your own picture of what you're going through into your music. I did read that your single Silence was sort of about the freedom of speech thing that's going on at the moment, and how like that's a divisive subject in itself, right?
Big time, yeah. Yeah, people love freedom if they get to say what they want to say, but that's not exactly freedom.
Yes.
It's a weird one because actually, when we were writing Dividing Lines, we actually had this idea that it was going to be a sequel to our last album, Legends of the Shires, and I'd written a whole story for that, and that was the plan, and we were going to call it The Fall of the Shires. And so, Silenced, although it was written with what was going on in the world in mind, it was kind of written towards this story that I'd written. So again, what I was saying earlier, it's more fiction than fact, but it was kind of fed a bit really by when we were told we had to stop touring, when the whole country locked down, when venues were having to close, businesses were going out of business, and it just felt like everyone was being silenced. It's like all these voices, all these places we used to get to go and play, and then freedom of speech sort of started getting attacked as well. And so it was very much a reaction to that. But again, it's supposed to be art. It's not supposed to be like negative commentary. I don't think anyone wants to hear political speeches in songs, and it's hopefully it's still an uplifting creative experience to listen to the song.
Yeah, oh, definitely. But it's interesting you say that it's meant to be art, because art really to me is a little dangerous and isn't meant to be safe. And the whole cancel culture thing, like where do artists go to from now? Like I did think, you guys have been around, since the early 90s, right? How has this shift into having to be careful about what you say and how you say it affected your songwriting? Do you feel like you have to be more careful nowadays about?
I think as long as we're sticking on that fictional side, I hope we're okay. We're not going out to criticize anybody. We're not going out to say negative things about people. That's not where we're at. We're not really even taking one side or another. I think a good example was with Brexit back in 2017 when we made the Legends of the Shires album. Brexit was all going on in UK politics. And if we'd have come out on one side or the other, we'd instantly lose 50% of our fans, because it was such a divisive issue. So we did talk about it on a record. And again, it's kind of loosely influenced the record, but you wouldn't listen to it and think, oh, it's an album about Brexit.
Sure.
And it's more talking about the themes and the ideas rather than the process and the pros and cons, So I think that'll always be our stance. We're not going to suddenly go hardline political activists or anything. We're just not those sorts of people. We're all just artists, and we love making art. But you do feel you have almost a responsibility to speak, when you have a platform where you can speak. So we do, as I say, we do cover some themes, and it's that whole thing with Silence. It felt like artists have a unique position in a way that we can speak in parables and in similes and metaphors. And so when you start seeing bands having to quit because they can't afford to carry on, and because of COVID and because venues are closing and stuff, that was where it felt like we were getting silenced as well. And it felt like it was potentially quite sinister, that it was intentionally shutting us down. But I'm very grateful to be proved wrong on that. And the fun will be back out on tour again next year. And most of the venues that we were going to are still open. So thankfully that prophecy didn't come.
Did you find that there were moments through lockdown, though, that had like a positive outcome for you? Like, did it give you a chance to concentrate on writing more music, or even non-musical projects? Did you get anything positive out of the experience?
Honestly, I kind of feel guilty for saying it, but I had a really good lockdown. I was I was stuck between two places, so I was spending most of my time obviously at home with my wife, and we took the opportunity to make an album. So we're in a duo together called League of Lights. So we thought, well, why not? Let's write a new album. So we had a fantastic time. We just wrote and record, and before we knew it, I think it took us 6-8 months or something. We'd a whole new album done, which we'd have never got done if we'd have had the busyness of normal life going on. But I also I was a carer for my dad, who was quite ill, so I was spending quite a bit of time with him as well. And while I was there, he was sleeping quite a lot, so I took the opportunity to start writing a book. So I was writing really down stories from my past, stories about Threshold. And before I knew it, it became an autobiography. So that's now finished and comes out next month. So
amazing.
Yeah. And again, I would have never done that. It was never even on my plans. but came out really well. I'm really pleased with it. Can't wait to share it with everybody. So it kind of tells mostly my story of being in Threshold, but a little bit more of my life as well. So it's one of those things. It was kind of inspired by my dad, actually. Sadly, he passed away about 3 months ago.
I'm sorry to hear that.
But one thing he'd done, he'd written down a few of his stories from his youth. He had some fairly wild adventures when he was young.
Yeah, cool.
And he'd written them down. He even had photos of them. So I turned one of these into a hardback book for him using one of these online services. And he loved it. And I thought, I wish he'd told me more stories before he died. And it kind of, again, that was really one of the things that inspired me to start writing mine down. And as much as anything, I want to have a copy when I'm 100 years old. And I'm thinking, I can't remember what I did when I was 20. And I can go to my book and read all about myself.
Yeah, hell yeah, that's awesome. Those are moments that you probably wouldn't have stopped and had if the world had carried on. So I think like there's light in the darkness. Hey, I've been asking a lot of people that I've interviewed lately, we've talked so much about the impact of the lockdowns on touring and venues, etc. But I'm now starting to ask people what their positive experiences were. And that's awesome. I love that. I will be looking out for your book.
Thank you. It's a weird one, isn't it? Because I know a lot of people struggled with loneliness and boredom as much as anything. A lot of people are living in houses where they don't necessarily get on with everybody. And so that was quite oppressive. And I know a lot of people obviously struggled with illness. So it's been a mixed time, but I'm certainly glad I had some positives out of that one.
So do you cross paths with many young bands in your genre, and are they sort of struggling with the same, I don't want to use buzzwords, but I want to go with that cancel culture, like shackles as well?
I honestly have no idea. We don't cross paths with many other bands, especially the last few years, obviously, because we haven't been out there much.
Well, yeah.
And to be honest, the surprising thing about being a musician is how little time you spend actually being a musician. The writing, the recording, the performing is only a small part of your time. Obviously there's things like this, doing interviews or spending a lot of time writing a book that didn't need to be written, but it was fun anyway. But admin, internet stuff, just day-to-day life. And so you're not kind of living out there on the road, meeting bands every night like you see in the movies. It's a little bit more mundane than that, but don't tell anyone.
Well, now you have to back that up with like your most rock star out there experience that you've had, just to like counterbalance that really boring answer you just gave me.
Yeah, sorry, that was dull. You feel free to edit it out. You have the power of the edit button on your side, so you can make this interview go however you want it to go.
No. I also figured, and forgive me if I'm stereotyping, but I figured I've got an Englishman on the other side of my screen here, so I can banter a little bit. So I'm like hoping I would get some banter out of you.
Well, it's funny. I was just proofreading my book, funnily enough, just before you called, because I've just got the final layouts back. And I was just reading a bit about one of the tours we did back in the 90s. And we were the typical Englishman on tour in Europe, more likely to say, "Can I have a cup of tea?" than we are shout, "Hell yeah." We're just not that sort of a band. And we were touring with this Californian band, and they were all about the rock and roll. And on the bus, there was a bong constantly going. They were doing drugs all the time. There was porn on the TV screens. And it was just a proper rock and roll lifestyle. And I hated every minute. That was where I developed the habit for going for long walks in the afternoon before sound check, just to get away from that whole thing. So you're not talking to an archetypal rock star here by any means.
The porn on the telly and the drugs on the bus. It's like, didn't they make a movie about that recently? I think it was called The Dirt, right?
I think you're right. Again, another American band. It's not the British way. It's not how we tend to do, or certainly not from my experience. I think one thing probably is when you get to the top of the ladder, you've got too much money and too much time, and you read all the time, don't you? Guys just do drugs because they're bored. There's nothing else to do. With Threshold, we never got to the top of the tree in the same way. We're always trying to climb that ladder, and we're always trying to prove ourselves. So you become a hard-working band, and you don't have the money to spend on drugs or the time to waste taking them. You're constantly making the next record or doing the next tour. So just by necessity, we're more of a working band in that way than we are a celebrity lifestyle sort of band. But we have our moments. We get to play some great festivals. One of my favorites before the pandemic was one called 70,000 Tons of Metal, which is this huge metal cruise that sails from Florida down to a different Caribbean island every year. It's ridiculously good. You get 3,000 fans on board, 60 bands, which is ridiculous. all the bands played twice. It's a big old ship. It's I think about 140,000 tons. I think the name's not quite correct because they've got a bigger boat now. But everyone gets to play twice on one of the 4 stages on board. You've got a full. It feels like a proper 5-star lifestyle, and you're on a free Caribbean cruise in the winter sun, and you're getting paid for it. We just sit there and think, you've got to be kidding. How do we get here? This is amazing.
Yeah, that sounds wild.
And we're not even metal. You listen to the bands on that boat and they're all so heavy. It's all death metal and black metal. And then we're there with our kind of catchy little pop songs with prog metal undertones. And it's they don't seem to mind. They invited us back. So that's my favourite moment, I think, of touring. Absolutely not what we thought was coming.
Yeah, that's a super rock star story. That's way more rock star than the other one you told. That's awesome.
There you go.
So you guys have seen like multiple lineup changes, right, in the years. How has altering the lineup sort of impacted the band? Like, I imagine for you guys as original members, it's made you quite versatile and good at adapting.
It's really weird because, I look at my favourite band, Queen, and they stayed the same 4 guys for their entire career. And hats off to them. I don't know how you do that because, you read stories, don't you? They didn't get on for certain periods and all that stuff, but they stayed together. And I wish we'd done that. I really wish I was in a band that could say, yeah, we're the same 6 guys that started out. But our original singer, Damien, left before we even got to do the first tour. He was off for the first opportunity. And that kind of probably set the tone a bit, I think. We just got used to an evolving lineup. And what's weird, someone said to me recently, they said, it doesn't matter which of your 3 singers is on the record. And they all sound quite different. But he said, you can always tell it's Threshold.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And that's kind of cool. Yeah, we didn't just suddenly change personality. I think it's because the core guys who stayed in the band kept on doing the writing, so you had that sense of continuity through it. So we just stayed the course. We can understand people have other opportunities and other ideas, and sometimes you just have to make a change. But loved every minute of it, and I've just feel privileged to have worked with all 3 of those singers and however many drummers it was. I've lost count.
Bloody drummers.
Yeah, absolutely. But we just had that privilege, working with such great guys. And what's nice is everyone mostly is all still friends, which is good.
I'm in a band myself, and we had band practice today, and I was telling the guys about you guys and the 3 different singers. And yeah, we were having that conversation about you can change out bass players, you can change out drummers, but singers almost always change the dynamic of the way a band sounds. And so I think that's really impressive that people have given you that feedback, that they say, even with different singers, your sound is still recognizable. I think that is a testament to you guys as musicians, for sure.
I remember when we first changed singer, I'm right back at the beginning, from Damien to Glyn, and Glyn then had to tour the album Glyn had to tour the album that Damien had recorded. And it felt like a con already, because we're playing this music to the fans and knowing they're going to buy a record that sounds nothing like it. And so it always felt like you've kind of had to start again and reinvent yourself. And then when we went to the 3rd singer, it was the same feeling. We thought, is anybody going to be interested? Because it's ridiculous. You've defined your identity and then you've changed it again. But since then, we've changed a few times, and I think people are just used to it. It's like, oh, it's Threshold. Yeah, that's what they do.
Yeah. Is there a formula when you've had to change members? Do you know sort of where to go looking? How do you put the word out when you've had to find new members?
We tend to rotate between the same 3 guys, to be honest. So it hasn't been so bad. So when Damien left at the beginning, we put an advert in Metal Hammer magazine in the UK and chose the best of the people who came back, and that was Glyn. When he then left, or was pushed, however you want to see it, we went back to Damien, so that made it easy. When Damien left again, we spoke to our record company, and they had a short list of singers they knew who were available, and we found this guy Mac, who was just ridiculously good, and he stayed with us for I think 5 albums. He sadly died, way too young. We found ourselves back with Damien again, came back the 3rd time, and then he left for a 3rd time, which that whole phrase, what is it, fooled me once, shame on you, fooled me twice, shame on me. We fooled me 3 times. There isn't even a phrase for that. No one's that stupid. But hey, that's what happened. And then we went back to Glyn again. So it was easy. It was familiar to the fans, and actually for the number of fans who were disappointed to see Damien, there were an awful lot that were pleased to see Glyn come back, because it felt like he had some unfinished business with us, and we managed to now fulfill that. And I'm just loving the way we sound, what we're writing, and it's all going well. And thankfully, we're still friends with Damien, so that's good.
A happy ending.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The new album sounds amazing, by the way. It's really catchy. It's poignant for the times, and but it's also just an enjoyable listen.
That's good to hear. So thank you for that, because that was the thing, isn't it? When you've got a slightly darker sounding record, I remember we described it as being Legends of the Shire's slightly moodier, darker, older brother. And there's always that worry, have you gone too dark? But I know that despite the kind of the darker themes on there, there's still a message of redemption. You've still got that feeling that if you stay true to yourself and don't get carried away by what the world's doing, then things will still be okay. And that's kind of our underlying theme. It's slightly more under the surface than it might normally be on a Threshold record.
I definitely got it, though. I got that rise above kind of message.
Good, because that's the important thing. And not to be swayed, by what's going on around us, because the world's weird now, but it's probably always been weird. It's just a bit more on the surface now.
Yeah, it's just weird on steroids for a little while, but they'll wear off.
Oh, I hope so.
So do you guys road test new songs live, and like does an audience impact what songs make it on a record, or do you keep things under wraps until they're released?
No, we used to road test them a bit back in the 90s because we'd be touring while we're writing the new record. So some of the new songs would work their way into the set and they'd start evolving a bit as we went along. But no, we haven't really done that since the 90s. We kind of do everything in chapters. So we go into a writing phase and then we go into a touring phase. So, and the way we write, we don't get in a room together and jam. We all write individually. We're just composers. So, a song might take a month. It might take 3 years to write. It's all done in our heads, So it's not sort of thing you can do in a rehearsal room. And when you finish writing a song, you put it to the band. Most of them end up on the record. Occasionally we'll do a few tweaks, but we kind of self-censor. So while you're writing, you know whether something's working or not. And the longer we've been doing this, the more obvious it is. So the ideas that aren't quite there just don't get finished, or developed. So we don't have a huge bag of unreleased songs. We've just got probably a little mountain of ideas that never got finished. And then all the good ones get developed and made into the album tracks. And then the fans just have to put up with them. They didn't get to tell us what they thought on the road. That's just what they get. But it seems to work quite well.
You either like it or you don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Seems to work quite well for us. We kind of know what Threshold's going to sound like before we start. So it's not like we go into a studio completely struggling for ideas. It's, we know what we want to do. We know what we want to sound like. And we'll tickle around the edges a bit and, go a bit more proggy on one track, a bit heavier on another. But generally we sound like Threshold. And that's probably what makes it work. Whoever's singing, we kind of know what we are.
And so with the songwriting, do you guys as individuals sort of come in with a mostly finished song and then just embellish it as a group? Or does it come in as a loose idea and everyone piles on?
Nearly always a finished thing. So we're all capable producers and capable writers. So we put together pretty good sounding demos with all the parts on. So you can kind of hear exactly what the song's going to be. A couple of differences. I think probably Damien wasn't that producer sort of person, so he'd come in more with an acoustic guitar and a melody, and then we'd flesh it out for him. There was a great song he wrote called "That's Why We Came," which was on our March of Progress album. But that was just a little acoustic track, and then it was my job to turn it into a big band arrangement. And we did the same with Mac, our previous singer. He had a song called "Do Unto Them," which was just a little acoustic track. So we did the same, turned it into a band thing for him because he didn't really know how. But on the whole, we just finished them all at home before we put them to the band. So it's kind of handy. So you've already road tested it in your studio, even down to the backing vocals, and you know it's going to work. And then the band's job is just to kind of give it their personality. So the song will change by 10 or 20% as a drummer comes up with a different idea here and a bass player plays a little different lick there. But they're pretty much as they were on the demo. And
what about lyrics? Is that an individual thing too? Or
so mostly it's since Subsurface, it's been me. I think most of the songs since then were either written by me or by me and Carl as a co-write, Carl being the guitarist. But he doesn't do lyrics, so I've always done the lyrics and the melodies for his songs. And then occasionally you'll get somebody else in the band who just puts forward an occasional song and then they write their own lyrics. The difference really is dividing lines, because with Glyn back in the band, he's a great writer. And so he's written 3 songs on this album. So it gave me a bit of a break. I only had to write the other 7. And he's done a great job. The second single, actually, King of Nothing, was one of his, and it's one of our strongest singles, I think. Great track.
I love all three of the singles. I'm very much a lyrics girl, so I was keen to know who the lyrics were, just because I've really enjoyed what I've heard so far.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Have you got tour plans for this album?
Yeah, so we're just booking at the moment, actually. We've got a festival in Germany, has already been announced, and one in Poland. And in between that, we'll do a full-on European tour. That's the plan. And then my hope is we just start conquering the world again. We get back out to America, finally come to Australia. That's the plan. And just conquer the world. We'll see what happens. But we're very much dependent on what the world looks like next year, whether we have another pandemic come and shut everything down again. But for the moment, things are looking really promising. The venues are getting booked, the fans are getting excited, and we can't wait to get back out there.
Yeah, all the festivals are coming back. Do you have a preference over festivals versus headlining shows?
No, I just love them all, to be honest. They're very different vibe, but it's just great fun. There's something really amazing about just being out on a nightliner, out on the road in Europe for 2 or 3 weeks. I absolutely adore that. It becomes a whole new lifestyle for that time while you're out. But then again, going to a festival, you just shuffle on the back of the stage at high speed, get your turnover done, and suddenly you're standing in front of 10,000 people. That's kind of cool too. So it's a nice lifestyle. That's one of the good bits, definitely.
Okay, I like to wrap up my interviews with like a bit of a silly question, just to keep it fun. So I thought, given that you've got the single Silenced, I'd work with that. So imagine that you've been permanently silenced and you can now only communicate with one of the following ways for the rest of your life. Are you choosing interpretive dance, mime, or Morse code? But you can only use an air horn for the Morse code.
Wow. Well, the air horn wouldn't bother me, would it? Because am I deaf as well?
But would it bother the people you live with?
Well, to be honest, I couldn't do interpretive dance because my wife would tell anybody I'm the worst dancer. I think like all men. So there's no way anybody would have a clue what I was trying to portray. No, the air horn, I couldn't bear doing that to other people. It's one of the worst sounds known to man. So I've already forgotten your second option.
It was mime.
Mime. I'm going to have to become a mime artist, I'm afraid.
I expect to see the face paint and everything. Stripy shirt.
Absolutely, you got to go the whole hog. But at least people don't have to listen if they don't want to. So I'd be miming away in the corner and probably just to myself. It's a sad world we've portrayed. Very negative way to end the interview.
Oh, I thought it was funny.
Well, I'm just thinking about never being able to make music again. I was hoping one of your options would be through interpretive piano playing. I'd go for that one. That would definitely be my answer.
I feel like in this day and age, technology's come a long way, and we could probably program notes to certain words and music could become a language of itself. So I'll put that to you. That can be your that can be your future if you ever get silenced.
Fantastic. Option 4 it is.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today. And I wish you all the success for the upcoming release.
Thanks. Really nice to talk to you.
The new album by Threshold is Dividing Lines. Make sure you check it out when it's released on Friday, November 18.